Hey guys, tonight we step into a mist-shrouded oasis at dawn, where dew-drenched palm fronds whisper secrets, and the air tastes faintly of sweet citrus. So crisp it makes your modern almond milk latte seem like muddy water. You probably won't survive this journey if you forgot your water skin. But let's pretend you remembered it at home. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time below so we can see who's awake at this ungodly hour. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across shifting dunes as the earliest tendrils of sunlight paint the sky in rose and gold. Historians still argue whether this stretch of the Silk Road was first used by camel caravans in the 2nd century BC or only formalized under Tang dynasty merchants. But either way, you feel the weight of centuries in each grain of sand beneath your boots. A fine mist clings to your sleeves, carrying hints of sour orange blossoms from groves hidden behind mud brick walls. According to mainstream accounts, citrus trees were introduced to these oases by Persian traders around the 5th century AD, offering weary travelers a tangy pick-me-up more effective than any energy bar. Here at this forgotten market, merchants unwind knotted rope hammocks to display silks dyed in saffron and madder, their deep reds glowing like embers in the soft morning light. You can almost taste the exotic threads. Well, not really, but your stomach growls anyway because no one warned you about breakfast. Joke's on you for skipping the hotel buffet back in Kashgar. Mist curls around a cluster of rudimentary tents pitched on cracked soil. Canvas and goat hair cloaks serve as walls, providing shade from the impending desert sun. Fringe historians whisper that some traders coated their tents in crocodile dung sunscreen, a rather literal way to shield against UV rays. Whether that actually worked is another matter. As you step closer, the smell of citrus deepens, layered with dust and camel sweat. A spice merchant carefully cracks open the shell of a dried bergamot fruit, releasing an aroma so pungent it makes your nostrils dance. Mainstream sources confirm that bergamot was prized in medieval Persia for both scent and digestive aid, but some say it was also used as an impromptu insect repellent. Historians still argue whether that story comes from genuine folk practice or a later traveler's tall tale. You pause at a wooden stall piled with rough-hewn pottery jugs filled with bright liquid. Yesterday's orange juice, more or less. Before refrigeration, merchants mixed sour citrus with honey and icy mountain snow, carried down in goatskin bags, creating a rudimentary slushy that would make any modern smoothie bar owner blush. It's liquid gold in these parts, and even though you suspect it will taste like fermented orange peel, you hand over a handful of silver dirhams just to find out. A wanderer in woolen robes greets you, handing over a chipped cup, and you take a cautious sip. The tang hits your tongue like a forgotten memory of childhood lemonade, but it's gone tangy in the back of your throat. Because, of course, ancient refrigeration was about as reliable as a camel on roller skates. 3 jokes in, and you haven't even left the first stall. All around, the desert's silence is broken by distant bleats, hushed barter, and a lone flute note that drifts through the tents. Some claim these markets opened only at dawn and dusk to avoid midday heat, turning the oasis into a twice-daily wonderland of commerce and camaraderie. Historians still argue whether midday trading ever really happened here, or if that was just a rumor merchants told to keep daytime wanderers off the dunes. As the sun climbs a fraction higher, shafts of light pierce the palm fronds overhead, spotlighting threads of silk and amber beads glinting on tables. You feel the ambient warmth seep into your bones, reminding you that this once vibrant market is now mostly abandoned, save for a handful of stubborn traders who refuse to quit. It's like showing up to an all-you-can-eat buffet at 3 a.m. and finding a single lonely eclair. In that moment, you realize you're not just witnessing a place frozen in time. You're part of its long, dusty story. A tale spun by every footfall, every citrus-sweet breath of wind, and every echo of laughter that once filled these stalls. And as you lean against a palm-thatched post, savoring the last drops of your tart drink, you know there's more to uncover just beyond the next dune. You lift your gaze from the half-empty orange cup and spot a slender line of camels trudging toward the market's edge, their legs stirring up fine clouds of ochre dust. You follow, stepping over broken pottery shards, as you approach a caravan's tail end where two traders hunch over sacks of salt and bales of silk. Salt was once so precious in this region that Roman legionaries earned part of their wage in it, hence the word salary. And here you are, watching it piled next to shimmering silk threads dyed in royal blue. Historians still argue whether salt caravans first traversed these dunes as early as the 1st century AD, or waited until lucrative Tang dynasty trade agreements, but the clink of silver coins suggests the answer matters less than the goods themselves. The first merchant, a wiry man in a turban woven from goat hair, hefts a lump of sun-baked salt and offers you a taste. You nibble it like a potato chip made of pure sodium, feeling your tongue prickle. Fringe accounts claim some traders mixed salt with powdered ashes to preserve meat on long journeys, a strategy you suspect would leave you smelling like a bonfire more than a gourmand. Whether those ashes came from date palm prunings or actually bone remains, historians still argue whether this practice enhanced flavor or just masked smells you'd rather forget. Above you, a silk trader stands in stark contrast. Her robes sway like liquid moonlight, and she holds up a fine woven scarf that shimmers with faint highlights. Silk production in China dates back to at least 3000 BC, a well-documented fact, yet that knowledge seems a world away as you squint against the rising sun. She beckons you closer and lets the scarf glide between your fingers. It's so delicate. You feel a twinge of guilt, like handling a butterfly's wing. Then she grins and reveals that some caravans used mule droppings to tan their silk, claiming it made the fibers stronger. It sounds suspiciously like the crocodile dung sunscreen story. But hey, if it keeps your precious cargo intact, who are you to judge? The air here crackles with heat despite the dawn's retreating mist. You wipe a bead of sweat from your brow and note that camels can survive a week without water, an adaptation that made them the ships of the desert during the peak of trans-Saharan trade. Fringe specialists argue about the exact routes these ships took. Did they hug the ancient lakebeds or navigate by the position of certain stars? Historians still argue whether traders relied more on celestial navigation or the gnarled tracks left by generations of hooves. You step between two camels, their humps swaying like lazy hills. One gives a low grunt and sprawls in the sand, while the other gingerly plucks a tuft of thorny scrub with its lips. You recall a fringe tale that some guides taught their camels to hum softly as a lullaby, believing the vibrations soothed the beasts during harsh sandstorms. Whether this humming actually calmed camels or simply annoyed them into submission, historians still argue, but you can't help humming a little tune yourself, mostly because you're running out of small talk. The traders settle on coarse mats, dumping small lumps of salt and loops of silk onto the ground in neat piles. The salt is so white it makes the desert around it look tired by comparison. You crouch to inspect a salt block stamped with the mark of a distant sultanate, proof that taxes were collected at every checkpoint along the route. Taxation on salt was once such a sore point that revolts flared up whenever caravans attempted to pass without paying duties. A mainstream source notes that medieval Khwarezm collected salt taxes worth hundreds of thousands of dirhams annually, filling royal coffers and causing more than a few grumpy tax collectors to gulp down sour tea. In despair, your silk trader companion grabs a folded piece of paper and slides it open. It's an invoice, handwritten in elegant calligraphy that you wouldn't dare emulate unless you want your letters to look like caterpillars on a caffeine binge. She explains quietly that some caravans used scented ink made from jasmine petals, hoping to mask the stench of livestock and rotting fruit. Historians still argue whether jasmine ink lasted through desert winds or simply faded into a fragrant smear. You imagine yourself scribbling a love letter with jasmine ink. Romantic until you realize desert sand probably turned it into a gritty confession. The two merchants huddle and begin trading, salt for silk, silk for salt, in a ritual as old as commerce itself. They measure salt with hollowed gourds and cut silk with small obsidian knives whose blades glitter like tiny stars. You watch as they hold each item to the sky, turning it this way and that, comparing textures with a silent focus that resembles modern sommelier rituals. It's oddly poetic, especially given that you're half asleep, and your stomach is staging a protest louder than the local flute player. Laughter erupts when a passing camel sneezes, sending a spray of dust onto the silk. The salt trader yelps, as if he's been doused with icy water. You crack your third joke of the morning, wondering aloud if the camel was just jealous of all the attention. The silk trader rolls her eyes, but you can tell she's amused. This small scene feels timeless. A sneeze, a startled reaction, and laughter bouncing between rippling tents. You realize these two figures represent a broader tapestry of cultures woven together by necessity and curiosity. Caravan routes didn't just exchange goods. They spread religion, technology, and even songs. Some claim the first known version of a lullaby traveled along these dunes, carried in the voice of a tired mother singing to her child under a camel's shadow. Historians still argue whether that lullaby was Persian or Sogdian in origin, but its melody echoes in every caravan campfire to this day. As the sun climbs higher, the traders wrap up their haggling, packing salt lumps into goatskin sacks and folding silk into linen pouches. You help hoist the lighter parcels onto the camels' backs, an unintended exercise that quickly reminds you why you skipped leg day. After loading, the caravan readies to move on, leaving behind empty mats and a faint trail of laughter, haggard footprints and spilled citrus juice. You straighten up, dusting sand from your robes, and watch the caravan recede into a shimmering mirage. Each beast's silhouette sways like a poem set in motion. And as you stand alone among the scattered remnants of salt and silk, you sense that this market's pulse isn't confined to stalls. It's carried in every step of those ancient traders pressing onward into the unknown. You step past the scattered salt and silk remnants and approach a low wooden cart piled high with jars of vibrant red threads and tiny black beads, saffron and pepper, the true gems of this desert bazaar. You lean in, inhaling a spicy sweetness, mingled with the sharp, woody scent that clings to your nostrils like an overenthusiastic salesman. Mainstream sources tell us that saffron was first cultivated in Iran over 3,000 years ago. And by the time these dunes hosted market stalls, its vivid crimson strands had already become one of the world's most valuable spices. Historians still argue whether its earliest flavor notes were prized more for dyeing royal garments or for adding luxury to morning porridges. But either way, you can't help imagining your breakfast cereal drenched in purple milk. Your fingers hover just above the glass jar as the spice merchant lifts a single saffron thread with a pair of brass tweezers. With a theatrical flourish, she dangles it before your eyes, explaining that a mere ounce could flavor thousands of dishes. Fringe tales claim some medieval cooks once used saffron not just for cooking, but as a rudimentary currency, exchanging threads like precious coins under the moonlit sky. Whether saffron ever truly served as legal tender, or if that was just a poetic exaggeration, historians still argue whether caravans ever carried it in sealed vaults or hid it in hidden pouches sewn into camel harnesses to fool jealous bandits. You nod appreciatively, though your stomach grumbles at the thought of sweet rice pancakes rather than this smoky morning air. The merchant plucks a few threads and lets you scent them. A heady perfume of honey, hay, and sun-baked earth. You close your eyes, picturing saffron-infused confections in some distant Persian court, where princes probably forgot to brush their teeth before bedtime. Modern flossing habits would have come in handy. Beside the saffron, peppercorns glisten like miniature obsidian spheres. You pick up a handful and roll them between your palms, feeling their weight and imagining the fiery warmth they'll unleash. Black pepper originated in the Malabar coast of India, an established fact that propelled these tiny beads across continents. Yet, some fringe historians whisper that pepper once held the power to cure the bubonic plague if steeped in goat's milk, an assertion you suspect belongs more in a medieval fairy tale than a medical journal. Historians still argue whether any physician of the time genuinely recommended such a concoction, or if desperate patients simply grabbed anything that smelled spicy enough. The spice merchant, a wiry woman with sun-creased skin, leans forward and taps the side of a clay jar. "Try the pepper," she says, her voice soft as sand. She cracks 3 peppercorns between smooth stones, releasing a burst of pungent heat that makes you cough and laugh simultaneously. Your third joke of the section, you quip that this must be the world's original pepper spray, effective for crowd control and the occasional wandering scorpion. She chuckles and offers you a pinch, warning you half-seriously that travelers once swallowed pepper beads whole as a secret test of bravery. You wonder if any such daredevil ever regretted it mid-swallow, but you're too polite to ask. Instead, you sprinkle a few grains onto your palm and let them dissolve on your tongue. The spice blossoms like a tiny desert firework, igniting your senses with a slow burn that lingers far longer than your last caffeine binge. The merchant tells you that pepper was so valuable that in medieval Europe it was sometimes referred to as black gold, and that even today the term lingers in some old proverbs. Historians still argue whether that name originated from actual monetary value or from pepper's ability to preserve food as reliably as salt. As the sun inches higher, shafts of light catch floating dust motes, turning them into miniature galaxies. Around the cart, you remember that flute melody from the first section, now drifting faintly in the distance, like a lullaby echoing through the dunes. The spice scents swirl around you, mingling with the faint perfume of date palms and the more pungent odor of camel leather. You inhale deeply and almost expect to taste saffron in the breeze. The merchant begins to pack small cloth pouches, a few saffron threads for morning tea, a tiny vial of peppercorns for evening stew. She uses a length of fine silk ribbon to tie each pouch, the same kind you saw draped over that crooked tent pole earlier. It's a small callback, but you appreciate that this scene feels stitched together across time, like an intricate tapestry woven by generations of traders and storytellers. Nearby, a spice grinder, a simple bowl and stone pestle, waits for action. You pick it up with a grin, remembering your last attempt at using one back home, which ended with paprika everywhere except in the bowl. You grind a few peppercorns until you can almost taste the empowering zing and offer some to a passing merchant in a bright turban. He tips his head back and inhales, then nods and hands you a dried fig in return, a gesture of barter that feels oddly romantic in its simplicity. This exchange, unrecorded in any official ledger, captures the essence of early bazaar life. A web of goods, aromas, and human connections woven under the same sun that bakes the dunes. Fringe lore suggests that some caravans carried special spice whispers, coded messages soaked into olive oil and hidden in pepper sacks. Intelligence packets passed between merchants and rulers. Whether those whispers ever changed the course of an empire or simply fueled gossip around campfires, historians still argue whether such practices were widespread or mere romantic myths whispered in desert nights. You tuck your pouches into your satchel, their contents promising to transform bland meals into memorable feasts. You glance up and spot the merchant unfurling another jar, this time containing an unidentified purple powder, perhaps dried sumac or crushed rose petals. But you resist, knowing you have a long journey ahead and only so much room in your camel saddlebag. 3 jokes and a dozen spices in, and you realize this cart is more than commerce. It's a microcosm of cultural fusion, where flavors meet philosophies in a single breath. The merchant waves as she finishes packing, and you step away, letting the carts and tents merge into the hazy horizon. In your mind, you can still taste the saffron's subterranean honey notes and the pepper's slow-building fire. You pat your satchel, grateful for these edible souvenirs that might outlast the memory of the market itself. And as you walk on, the desert breeze carries one last scent, the promise of more discoveries just beyond the next sand ridge. The spice. Voyage isn't over. It's simply taking a well-deserved pause before the next chapter unfolds under the scorching midday sun. You step into the wavering shade of a cluster of makeshift tents, where goat hair weaves stain the air with faint smokiness, and taut camel wool flaps ripple like lazy waves in a golden sea. Beneath your feet, coarse sand shifts with each breath, a reminder that nothing here is permanent, save for the desert's patient insistence. Historians still argue whether these early desert tents evolved from simple animal hide shelters or were innovations of the nomadic Bedouin as early as the 7th century AD, but you can see both practicality and artistry woven into every fiber. Each stall here is a humble construction. 4 wooden poles driven into the sand, tied together with strips of leather, then draped in goat hair cloth that keeps out both sun and sudden chills. Bedouin tents, as recorded in mainstream accounts, were designed to be portable yet sturdy, packing down into bundles no larger than a modern backpack. You recall the caravan's salt and silk piles from Section 2, now replaced by this tactile landscape of textures, soft goat hair, stiff weaving, and the occasional loose stitch that flaps in the morning breeze. You brush your hand along a tent wall and feel the roughness of the weave, each knot a testament to countless nights bound by stars. Fringe lore suggests some tents were treated with a concoction of camphor and crushed dates to ward off scorpions, because nothing says sweet home like a scent strong enough to mask real estate nightmares. Whether that mixture really repelled pests or just lured in curious insects for an aromatic party, historians still argue whether such practices were widespread or confined to superstitious clans. Inside one tent, the faint smell of saffron from your pouch mingles with smoky incense, drifting from a small brazier at the center. A merchant crouches beside it, stirring a pot of barley porridge with a wooden ladle. You sneak a peek and realize it's the desert version of an all-you-can-eat buffet, though the menu is more grains and grit than gold. You joke that at least it pairs well with your luxury saffron threads, creating a Michelin star experience. On a bed of sand. 3 jokes and no Michelin star tonight, but hey, you're here for history, not haute cuisine. The merchant offers you a cup of the porridge, topped with a pinch of crushed dates. You lift the bowl, and it's warm enough to chase away the last chill of dawn. Mainstream sources tell us that barley was a staple across ancient trade routes, prized for its long shelf life and easy cooking. And here, in this rudimentary market tent, it still nourishes wandering souls. You take a spoonful, and the porridge slides down your throat like a comforting memory you never knew you had, until you taste the grit. At least it's authentic, you muse, and a great exfoliant if you wanted a facial. Above you, tent flaps are held open by slender sticks, creating a series of doorways that frame the dusty horizon beyond. Each opening reveals a different scene: a spice merchant sorting pepper in the pale light, a trader mending a silk scarf with an obsidian needle, a hermit stirring a vial of purple powder as if it were the elixir of youth. It's a kaleidoscope of human endeavor, bound together by simple architecture, and you marvel at how these makeshift tents transform into microcosms of civilization. Outside one stall, 2 camels are tied to a wooden post, munching lazily on seagrass salvaged from a distant marsh. You approach, greeting them with a soft, "Hello," and they respond with gentle lowing. probably wondering why a sweaty human is invading their snack time. Fringe travelers claim some camel owners hung old leather boots from their tents' corners, believing the scent kept away jinn and other desert spirits. Whether those boots ever frightened off anything more than confused goats, historians still argue whether this was an effective spiritual defense or merely a creative form of tent decor. You wander deeper into the market's fabric maze, noticing that each stall's layout is unique yet follows a basic pattern. Low benches lining the sides, a central space for goods, and a small hearth off to one corner for food or incense. You crouch at one bench and run your fingers over a length of raw silk, rough, unrefined, almost scratchy against your skin. A nearby weaver explains that silk from earlier dynasties lacked the refinements of the Tang period, resulting in a coarser texture. It's like the difference between a hand-knit sweater and that scratchy promotional tee you got at high school. Historians still debate how these texture variations influenced trade values, but you're just glad your fingers survived the test. The sun now peeks over the dunes, casting sharp, angled light through the tent flaps that turns the interior into a patchwork of brightness and shadow. Dust motes drift lazily in the beams, each one a minuscule traveler from some distant storm. You recall the saffron threads glowing like embers in Section 3, and now these motes twinkle like an entire galaxy in a makeshift palace. It's almost poetic, if you ignore the occasional tumbleweed that crashes through, like a clumsy guest barging into an art gallery. You pause by a tent where the walls are patched with colorful fabric scraps, stripes of red, green, and gold, salvaged from unworn garments. The owner, a silver-haired matron, notices your curiosity and beckons. She points to each patch, recounting stories of silk won in far-off courts that now languish here as humble repairs. Fringe legends suggest she once stitched a sack of pearls into a tent flap during a surprise inspection by a desert governor, hiding the treasure in plain sight. Historians still argue whether that governor ever suspected anything or simply admired her patchwork skills. Clearing your throat to mask a yawn, you navigate toward the market's outer ring, where the tents thin out and give way to empty dunes. One last stall stands here, a simple canopy of woven reeds, beneath which sits a lone elder sipping a sweet barley drink. His gaze follows you, and he smiles, eyes crinkling like old parchment. You offer him a nod, and he raises his cup in salute. You tip your own imaginary hat in return, feeling oddly dignified for someone who just yawned loudly. As you step back into the open, the tents recede behind you, their goat hair walls blending with the dunes until they vanish beneath the morning sun's glare. You pause, letting the quiet reclaim you, and realize that these makeshift stalls, so fragile, so ephemeral, have housed dreams, deals, and daring across countless dawns. And though you came seeking a forgotten market, you leave with the deeper understanding that human ingenuity can flourish even in the most transient of places. You wander beyond the patchworked tents and find yourself standing before a cluster of sun-baked stones arranged in a perfect circle, the rim of an ancient well. It yawns at you, dark and cool, promising relief from the desert's relentless thirst. Historians still argue whether the earliest qanats, underground water channels, originated in Persia around the 1st millennium BC, or were first perfected by Nabatean engineers near Petra. But every drop here tastes like both tradition and triumph. Leaning over the circular opening, you peer into the shaft's inky depths, imagining water pooling somewhere below, shielded from evaporation by layers of earth. Mainstream accounts confirm that these wells tapped into underground aquifers, feeding oasis settlements for centuries and transforming barren dunes into bustling way stations. You can almost hear the echo of wooden buckets hitting stone as generations of traders hauled up liquid salvation. A wooden bucket, patched with goat leather and stained by mineral-rich water, lies abandoned nearby. Fringe lore claims some wells were guarded by carved stone statues of ibex or lions to ward off mischievous desert spirits that might poison the water, though you suspect those statues were more ornamental than functional. Historians still argue whether such guardianship rituals enhanced water quality or merely provided an excuse for evening storytelling around the well. As you settle on the sun-warmed stones, a wind-blown scrap of papyrus drifts by, an old water rationing decree, half illegible, in faded ink. You pick it up and read the scrawled instructions. Each traveler was entitled to a single bucket, no more, no less. Overuse meant fines or, in fringe cases, a dip in the well itself. An improvised cold bath that startled more than a few overambitious merchants. Whether anyone ever really faced that penalty or if it was simply a cautionary exaggeration, historians still argue whether water regulation here was enforced by law or communal custom. You look around and spot a narrow trench leading away from the well, partially hidden by drifting dunes. It's one of several kanat channels designed to carry water horizontally, using gravity alone to supply distant fields and tents. The channel's sides are lined with smooth stones to prevent collapse, and small ventilation shafts puncture the surface at regular intervals. Mainstream sources note that each ventilation shaft also served as an access point for cleaning silt, a laborious task often performed by young apprentices. You follow the trench's shallow curve, tracing the path. Water once took under the searing sun. It's eerie to think of this lifeline flowing unseen beneath your feet, like a secret vein nourishing the desert's heart. Fringe travelers whisper that some kanats ran for miles, connecting oasis after oasis in a subterranean network rivaling any medieval road map. Historians still argue whether traders used these underground routes to smuggle valuables, or if the cool shafts simply offered occasional refuge on scorching days. Pausing at a ventilation shaft, you peer into its circular mouth and listen. There's a faint drip, a muted heartbeat echoing from below. You imagine water trickling through the channel, perhaps splashing in a cistern or feeding a date palm's thirsty roots. It's like hearing the desert breathe. You scoop up a handful of loose sand and watch it sift through the metal grate, falling unseen into the kanat. It's a reminder that even the smallest grains can infiltrate the grandest engineering feats, prompting regular maintenance, an early version of preventive care for water infrastructure. Mainstream historians credit these Persian-engineered systems with supporting agricultural surpluses that fueled city growth and cultural exchange. A nearby path leads you to a small field where date palms stand in neat rows. You recall that palms need a constant trickle of water, and these shallow furrows, fed by the kanat, kept their roots moist. You close your eyes and almost taste the sweet, sticky dates that once hung heavy on these fronds. Fringe tales claim certain dates were soaked in spring water for days to produce a soft, almost buttery texture. Some culinary experiment you'd pay to taste, if only your satchel weren't already bursting with spices. Historians still argue whether those soaked dates were a luxury reserved for nobility or simply a creative snack traders shared around campfires. As you approach the palm grove, a sudden gust sweeps through, rustling fronds and kicking up motes of dust. You duck, narrowly avoiding a flying date. You joke that desert fruit can be as feisty as a sandstorm. 3 laughs in and you're still on your first grove. Behind the palms you find a smaller well, its rim carved from a single stone slab. A faded engraving depicts a caravan of camels and traders, a visual reminder that this oasis thrived on connectivity. You run your fingers over the carving, feeling how time has smoothed the edges. It's a fringe belief among local storytellers that mass pilgrimages once converged here, pilgrims carrying sacred water to distant shrines, a ritual so hush-hush that official records remain silent. Historians still argue whether evidence of such pilgrimages exists, or if the tales simply grew over generations of desert nights. You settle back down, letting the warmth seep into your shoulders. The well before you seems less like a hole in the ground and more like an open invitation to history's hidden currents. You lean forward and, just to feel closer, you dip a finger into the cool darkness. No faucet, no pump, just a silent promise that life can flourish even in the most austere landscapes. You rise and brush sand from your robes, the sound crisp in the still morning air. As you turn to leave, you glance one last time at the circle of stone, at the deep darkness that once quenched thousands of throats. You carry with you the sense that water, more precious than any spice or silken thread, is the desert's truest treasure. You emerge from the shadow of the palms into the bustling heart of negotiation, where every word is weighed like gold and every gesture carries silent meaning. Two merchants stand opposite you, crouched low on woven reed mats scattered atop fine, desert sand. In one hand, a dealer clutches a length of deep blue silk. In the other, he jingles a handful of silver dirhams, currency once standardized under the Abbasid Caliphate in the 8th century, ensuring traders from Baghdad to Samarkand spoke the same monetary tongue. Historians still argue whether that standardization accelerated Silk Road commerce or simply sparked new rounds of coin counterfeiting. But either way, you're here for the show. The silk trader, a woman whose fingers are stained by madder dye, eyes the coins with an appraising frown. She strokes the fabric between her thumb and forefinger, then lifts the edge to catch the sunlight, inspecting each thread's shimmer. You recall that silk first reached Persia by the 1st century AD, carried by daring emissaries who hid raw cocoons in hollow bamboo canes, an ingenious method that sparked China's monopoly breaking. Fringe tales claim these original smugglers rode on palanquins carried by exiled eunuchs, but historians still debate how much of that sounds like bedtime gossip. You lean in, fascinated by the ritualized dance unfolding before you. The merchant raises a single coin, then flicks it toward his counterpart with a practiced wrist snap. It lands on the silk, rolling once before stopping. A telltale sign. The coin's roll reveals whether it's perfectly weighted or a forgery. Mainstream accounts confirm that coin flipping tests became common by the 10th century, helping buyers avoid bad money and bad hair days. You stifle a laugh at the thought of ancient heads nodding at coins as if inspecting tiny acrobats. Now, the silk trader taps the fabric twice with her knuckle, an established signal meaning she found a flaw in the silk weave. You almost ask if this Morse code translates to, "Do you accept bartering birds next?" but wisely swallow the joke. Fringe historians whisper that some traders used secret haggling codes involving subtle eyebrow twitches or toe taps to communicate with allies across crowded bazaars. Historians still argue whether such codes were widespread or limited to guild leaders guarding their profit margins. The salt merchant counters by placing a small pile of salt lumps on the mat, lining them up like miniature sentries. Each lump is measured by weight, somewhere between 200 and 250 grams, checked against an iron scale sealed with the local sultan's insignia. Under medieval Khwarezm rule, these scales were meticulously calibrated every month, ensuring fairness, and apparently fewer merchant petitioners at the city gate. You crack your first joke. You wonder aloud if the sultan appreciated his scales more than his palace carpets. She narrows her eyes, then plucks up one salt lump and rubs it between her fingers, releasing a cloud of fine white dust. "Too coarse," she murmurs, tossing it aside. You wince, imagining someone's morning stew tasting like crunchy beach sand. Mainstream records note that some markets graded salt into as many as 5 categories, from table grade to livestock grade, each fetching distinct prices. You quip that livestock grade must have been a great promotional term for camel croutons. The haggle continues, back and forth, until finally the silk trader nods and presents a sealed clay token bearing her family crest. It's a gesture of commitment. She'll accept the coins in exchange for the silk and deliver them at the next drop-off point. Such tokens, called basht, were common from Persia to China, ensuring trust among strangers in a world where legal courts were often days away. Fringe scholarship wonders if some traders stacked these tokens like poker chips in secret side games. Acclaimed historians still argue based on fragmentary manuscripts. As the two rise, you're invited to inspect the final trade. You lift the silk, feeling its weight in your hand, then peer at the dirham pile, each coin gleaming with the caliph's profile. You muse that if you collected 100 of these coins, you could buy yourself a grand feast, or at least a very noisy donkey. 3 jokes so far, and you're only halfway through the negotiation. Nearby, the spice vendor from Section 3 watches approvingly, while a caravan guard sips barley water behind the caravan's rear camels. He gives you a wink. You realize he's been listening to your jokes all morning and might be considering an official title. Desert Court Jester. You laugh and thank him, though he swears he'll only trade laughter for an extra sack of dates. As the sun climbs, the market's hum grows louder. You step back as the merchants finalize their bargain, wrapping the silk in oiled cloth and tying it with ribbon, then shaking out a fresh sack of salt to rest on the camel's hump. The salt's dust mingles with your laughter, a fitting souvenir of commerce in the sand. Before moving on, you glance at the marketplace rules etched onto a wooden board nailed to a palm trunk. No bright colors after dusk, no open flames within, 15 paces of grain stalls, and no insulting another trader's mother, presumably a rule invented after one too many barbs at family honor. Fringe versions suggest an additional rule against sneezing near high-value goods to avoid triggering dust that might damage merchandise. Historians still argue whether that sneeze ban ever appeared in any official decree or lived only in market. Myths. You step away from the haggling circle, heart light from humor and mind brimming with the art of ancient bartering. Every glance, every tap, every flick of a coin is part of a timeless negotiation theater, one that shaped empires as much as any battlefield. And as you walk toward the next cluster of tents, you already miss the crackle of trade, knowing you'll carry these lessons in subtle dance and clever signals long after the dunes reclaim this moment. You pause at the edge of the main thoroughfare, ears attuned to the waking market's chorus of haggling voices, camel grunts, and distant flute melodies drifting on the breeze. A group of young vendors kicks the morning's dust from their stall mats, preparing to project their sales calls across the sand. Historians still argue whether early market criers mimicked bird calls to draw attention or simply shouted louder than their rivals. But either way, you brace yourself for an auditory tapestry that rivals any modern city's traffic. A lanky spice seller sets the tone, calling out, "Fresh sumac! Brighten your stew, banish your blues." His voice rises and falls in a rhythmic chant that mixes playful rhyme with sincere promise, proof that marketing techniques are timeless. Fringe scholars claim some criers carried small drums to punctuate their calls, creating a percussive beat that echoed between tents. Whether drums were widespread or reserved for grand festivals, historians still argue whether such theatrics were favored by travelers or viewed as noisy distractions. Next door, a linen merchant leans against a woven reed post, gently rattling a string of bronze bells to announce her arrival. You crane your neck to watch as each bell catches the light and chimes in turn, forming a delicate melody that drifts lazily through the market aisles. Mainstream records note that traders often used auditory signals, like bells or wooden clappers, to differentiate their wares from others and help weary listeners locate a particular stall amid the clamor. You can't help humming along, inadvertently joining the soundscape. Along the stall's edge, a group of children giggles as they chase a stray rooster, its plumage a riot of red and gold that looks oddly regal against the sandy backdrop. The bird's frantic squawks add another layer to the morning's cacophony, prompting you to quip that even poultry here demands its moment in the spotlight. 3 jokes in, and you're winning the local farmyard sympathy vote. You lean closer to a tent where a merchant polishes a brass oil lamp, its surface etched with swirling arabesques. He lifts it high and whispers, "Light your nights with Oasis gold," his voice low and conspiratorial. You note that oil lamps became common household items across the Near East by the early Islamic period, valued both for illumination and ritual use. Historians still argue whether the sweet oil scents used at festivals were purely decorative or believed to ward off ill spirits. But you're more concerned with not tripping over your own feet in the dimming dawn light. A sudden gust rattles a cluster of hanging silks, and the bells tinkle in response, creating a serendipitous duet of metal and fabric. You close your eyes and imagine yourself leaning back on a woven cushion, sipping sweet tea by lantern light. It's oddly soothing, a far cry from the desert's daytime roar. Fringe anecdotes suggest some vendors timed their calls to coincide with mosque prayer times, offering special discounts to departing worshippers. Whether that practice boosted sales or simply flattered pious customers, historians still argue whether religious timing became a formal marketing tool. A small procession of traders approaches, led by a man carrying a shallow copper tray piled with baked flatbreads. Each round loaf is scored with decorative patterns meant to catch butter or honey, and their warm, yeasty aroma rises like an irresistible invitation. You realize you haven't eaten anything since that gritty barley porridge in Section 4, so you trail behind the procession, your stomach rumbling in solidarity. You crack a joke. You'd buy a camel just for the privilege of constant bread deliveries. 3 laughs so far in Section 7, still on track. The baker grins and breaks off a piece of bread, handing it to you. You feel its warmth between your palms, then bite into its soft crumb. Mainstream sources credit date-sweetened flatbreads as regional staples, often flavored with cardamom or sesame seeds. Historians still argue whether these toppings spread northward from Arabia or westward from Mesopotamia, but no one disputes their ability to enhance any meal. You savor the bread, noting its subtle sweetness and the way crumbs cling to your fingertips like desert sand. Nearby, a vendor sells small ceramic flasks of almond milk, pure, milky white liquid that contrasts sharply with the earthy tones around. You lift the flask and taste the cool drink, its nutty richness enveloping your senses. Fringe records mention that some travelers added rose water to almond milk for special occasions, turning a simple refreshment into a floral extravaganza. Whether those celebratory flasks ever made it as far as this market or stayed reserved for palatial courts, historians still argue whether rose-infused drinks were common or rare luxuries. You pause by a woven screen to watch as a group of traders demonstrates the art of rope making, twisting palm fibers into thick cords strong enough to tether camels or hang goods from tent ridges. A young apprentice takes center stage, looping fibers around his elbow and pulling them taut with quick, practiced motions. Mainstream evidence shows that rope making was essential tradecraft, with some ancient manuals detailing dozens of twisting techniques. Fringe theory suggests certain knots carried secret meanings, like sailors' messages stitched into maritimes, flags. But historians still argue whether desert ropes bore coded signals or were purely functional. Your attention shifts to a distant cluster of tents, where a musician plays a wooden reed pipe, a simple melody that winds through the markets. Clamor like a calm river. You recognize the tune from sections 1 and 3, a callback that feels both familiar and comforting. It's the same song, drifting through the oases like a traveling lullaby. Historians still argue whether such melodies originated in Central Asia or Persia before diffusing across trade routes, but you appreciate the unity it brings to the bustling chaos. As the sun climbs relentlessly, the market's soundscape crescendos. Vendors call louder, animals bray, and the reeds of the tents hum. In the wind, you chew your bread and sip almond milk, letting the auditory symphony wash over you, each note each call feels part of a grand composition, a living mosaic assembled daily to sustain commerce and camaraderie. You crack a final joke, calling this soundscape the world's first desert radio, broadcasting live at dawn. The market-goers laugh, tipping their hats or cupping hands to their ears in mock salutes. You smile, realizing that even in this ancient setting, humor transcends eras. Stepping away, you let the market's melodies fade behind you, carrying the memory of trade calls and flute tunes like comfort music. You head toward the next stall, in search of incense, relics, or perhaps another bite to eat, knowing the morning's soundtrack will echo in your mind long after the dunes reclaim their silence. You wander past the fading echoes of market cries and find yourself drawn to a low bench draped in opulent fabrics, where a merchant displays delicate strands of pearls alongside dark resin incense, gifts from distant seas. The pearls gleam with a soft moonlit glow, each a testament to oysters plucked from the Arabian Gulf's shifting tides. Historians still argue whether pearl diving was first organized under Sasanian rule in the 3rd century AD or earlier by Dilmun sailors, but mainstream sources confirm that by the early Islamic period, pearls were prized across courts from Baghdad to Cordoba. You lift a single pearl between thumb and forefinger, its surface cool and nearly flawless. Fringe whispers suggest some divers trained sea turtles to guide them to hidden oyster beds, a claim you suspect sounds more like bedtime myth than maritime manual. Whether any turtle ever answered the call of a diver's shell horn, historians still debate how divers located their deepest halls before modern diving gear. Beside the pearls, incense cones smolder softly on a bronze brazier, releasing ribbons of perfumed smoke that curl upward like phantom dancers. You lean in, inhaling, a sweet woody fragrance that conjures lush sandalwood forests you've never seen. Mainstream records note that Indian and Southeast Asian traders introduced these resins along maritime silk routes as early as the 1st century AD, enriching religious ceremonies and aristocratic salons alike. Historians still argue whether frankincense traveled more frequently by sea or overland. But you don't mind the mystery, any excuse for more incense jokes. You ask the merchant for a closer look at the incense, and he taps the side of a resin chunk with a tiny obsidian blade, snapping off a piece that crackles like embers under your fingertips. He explains that some desert nomads burned camel dung first to test wind direction, using the smoke's behavior to predict storms. Fringe accounts claim this method doubled as a makeshift deodorizer, though you suspect the side effect was merely masking more pungent odors. Historians still argue whether dung tests ever provided accurate weather forecasts or simply kept traders entertained on long journeys. Turning back to the pearls, you notice each strand is separated by tiny knots, a precaution that prevents all your treasure from slipping away if a single thread breaks. Mainstream evidence shows that ancient pearl stringers used this knotting technique as early as 200 BC in India, preserving fortunes in miniature loops. You joke that they must have been the world's first risk managers. Don't put all your pearls in one basket, and so on. The merchant pours a handful of crushed resin into a small clay bowl and lights it, sending a plume of scented smoke spiraling upward. You watch as motes of ash drift lazily in the breeze, like embers from a distant bonfire. He tells you that in some coastal regions, people believed incense smoke could ward off sea serpents and mermaid curses, an idea both charming and a little unsettling if you're planning a seaside vacation. Historians still argue whether these beliefs influenced trading patterns or were simply local superstitions on par with "don't swim after dark." You take a pinch of frankincense and let it melt on your tongue. Yes, people ate these resins for medicinal purposes, claiming they soothed sore throats and settled anxious stomachs. Mainstream sources note that Greek physicians wrote of frankincense's healing virtues in the 4th century BC. Yet you can't help grimacing as the resin's piney bitterness spreads across your palate. 3 jokes already, and you still taste. like a forest fire. Nearby, lustrous mother-of-pearl shells are stacked like trophy plates, each engraved with primitive maps of distant ports, Hormuz, Muscat, and even far-flung Canton. You trace the engraved lines with your fingertip, imagining sailors' hands guiding maps beneath flickering lanterns. Fringe lore claims some map makers hid secret codes within pearl engravings, revealing safe harbors only to trusted captains. Historians still debate whether these codes ever altered the course of naval battles or simply served as decorative embellishments. The merchant unravels a silk pouch and reveals a single strand of the finest pearls you've ever seen. So uniformly round they look too perfect to be natural. He smiles and admits these were sorted by color and shape using gentle vinegar washes, a process so meticulous it earned craftsmen the title pearl surgeons. Mainstream texts confirm that medieval Sasanian artisans developed these techniques, elevating pearl stringing to an art form. Historians still argue whether vinegar rinses risked dulling luster or actually enhanced the pearl's sheen, but you have to agree they look stunning. A sudden breeze billows through the stall, swirling the incense smoke into a spiral that drifts into the open. You watch as the fragrant haze drapes across the pearls, lending them a mystical aura. You joke that if you stand here long enough, you'll become the world's most aromatic human. 3 laughs deep and counting. The merchant guides you to a small wooden crate filled with oyster shells, each cracked open to reveal remnants of clear resin, a byproduct of pearl harvesting. He explains that local women used these shells as oil lamps after cleaning off the resin, demonstrating an early example of upcycling that would make any modern environmentalist proud. Historians still debate whether this practice was widespread, or simply a resourceful fringe custom among coastal communities. You pick up a shell and inspect its charred wick, then set it gently back in the crate. A faint squeak from nearby catches your attention. A merchant's monkey trained to retrieve lost pearls from the sand. The small creature scuttles over, snatches a misplaced pearl, and drops it at its owner's feet before scampering away. Fringe anecdotes suggest some traders bred falcons to hunt oyster beds, but you suspect those stories belong in a fantastical bedtime tale rather than a market reality. Historians still argue whether any raptor-based pearls searches ever occurred or remained whispers in sailors' taverns. As the sun finishes its climb, the merchant wraps your selected strand of pearls in soft linen and places the incense in a reed basket lined with palm fronds. You slip them into your satchel, their combined weight oddly grounding after days of drifting across dunes. You pat the satchel once, murmuring a fourth joke about your ever-expanding collection of oddly scented souvenirs. Stepping away, you breathe in one last plume of incense, letting its calming aroma fill your lungs. The pearls rest against your side, cool and reassuring. And as you move on toward the market's fringe, you carry with you the sense that these gifts from the East, incense and pearls, are more than commodities. They're echoes of distant waves and secret depths, a reminder that even the driest desert can harbor treasures from the vast, mysterious seas. You step back from the dazzling incense haze and pearls, finding yourself before a weathered wooden plank nailed to a palm trunk, your gateway into the market's curious code of conduct. The sun casts sharp angles, illuminating the carved rules, etched in ancient script. No bright colors past dusk, no open flames within 15 paces of grain stalls, and the crowd favorite, no insulting another trader's mother. Historians still argue whether these edicts were enforced by patrols of desert guards or merely recited as oral tradition before each trading season. But you can't help smiling at the notion of a stern, camel-mounted officer handing out citations. Burly merchant in a faded robe points to a peculiar addendum at the board's bottom. Sneezing near wares incurs a dust fine. You raise an eyebrow. Sneezing fees seem oddly specific, as though one rogue hay fever sufferer once blanketed the entire spice row in powder. Fringe lore suggests this rule stemmed from a notorious sneeze duelist who challenged sellers to sneeze the finest cough onto prized silks. The winner claimed both the fabric and a generous tip. Historians still argue whether the sneeze duel was real or a tall tale passed around campfires. Either way, you joke that you'll keep your allergies under wraps. Turning left, you notice a small kiosk manned by a grizzled elder who serves as the market's unofficial rule interpreter. Travelers form a polite queue, holding clay tokens as advice fees. When your turn arrives, you hand over a token and ask how strictly the mother insult rule was taken. He strokes his white beard, eyes twinkling, and recounts the one and only recorded offense: a boisterous rug weaver who insulted a caravan guard's mother, triggering a week of dusty silence as no one spoke to the guilty party. Whether that story is history or a cautionary fable, historians still debate if any real punishment occurred beyond collective cold shoulders. Nearby, a group of children giggles, reenacting their own version of the sneeze duel using rolled-up parchment and mock sneezes. You can't resist a joke. Perhaps they'll find themselves for too much fun. The elder chuckles at your comment, then whisks out a tiny reed whistle, blowing a clear note that quiets the crowd. He explains that whistles were once used to signal rule changes, like a market-wide referee's whistle. Mainstream accounts note that similar signals were common in bazaars across the Umayyad Caliphate, keeping order among hundreds of traders. Historians still argue whether whistles or drums made more effective announcements, but you're content with this peaceful resolution. The elder then points to another sign. Tardiness in tent setup incurs a sunny bench duty. You imagine trading silk for the honor of sitting on a hot bench, fanning weary traders with date palm fronds. Fringe travelers swear that some merchants actually hired professional bench fans to stave off bench duty. Historians still argue whether bench fan guilds ever existed, or if this was just spin from clever tent raiders. You stroll across the rule area, noticing footprints etched into the sand marking where violators stood during public apologies. A hush falls as you step onto the first footprint, apparently a spot for the clumsiest trader who spilled mustard seeds last season. You pretend to offer an apology to imaginary mustards, eliciting smiles from onlookers. Before leaving, you ask the elder about one last rule. Respect the sunrise with one sigh of awe. He smiles serenely, nodding, and invites you to stand with him facing the horizon. Together, you let out a single synchronized sigh as shafts of pink light break across the dunes, a ritual blending respect, relief, and collective ooh. Mainstream. Historians note such sunrise acknowledgements were found in oasis communities to mark trading days, but they still debate their spiritual versus practical origins. You step away feeling oddly serene, the market laws leaving an imprint deeper than any fine silk or pungent spice. The rules, both quirky and earnest, weave a framework of trust and camaraderie in a landscape where survival depends on mutual respect. And as you move on, the plank of wooden laws stands behind you, a silent testament to humanity's endless drive to order even the wildest of places. You slip away from the market's bustle and follow a narrow, winding path toward a cluster of flat-topped rocks half buried in the sand. Markers left by travelers long gone. Your fingertips brush over faint grooves carved into the stone, mapping invisible highways that crisscross the dunes. Mainstream archaeologists confirm that desert way markers, or milestones, guided caravans across featureless expanses as early as the first millennium BC, ensuring merchants didn't end up hugging cacti instead of camel saddles. Historians still argue whether these markers formed part of a standardized map system or were simply personal signs left by individual traders. A carved arrow points toward the west, where the dunes rise like faded parchment. You crouch and trace the glyph, a stylized camel and crescent moon. Fringe researchers whisper that certain symbols doubled as secret codes. A crescent moon with a dot, for instance, indicated fresh water nearby, while a lone camel signaled a safe resting spot. Whether these glyphs ever truly guided lost caravans to water, or merely amused bored traders, historians still argue whether the codes were practical aids or playful graffiti. You stand and squint at the horizon, imagining a line of weary figures, following these silent instructions under blistering sun. The arrow's direction seems too precise for random carving. It must have taken patient chiseling with a metal tool. Mainstream studies show that early mapmakers used simple compasses and star positions to orient their carvings. A remarkable feat considering they lacked GPS. Though you might argue they had better hand lotion for chapped fingers. Next to the milestone, you spot a shallow depression in the sand. An imprint of an old camel footprint the size of a dinner plate. Fringe legend claims these giant prints were left by jinn-mounted chargers, sent to protect sacred roots. But you suspect. The truth is simpler. A particularly large camel, or perhaps an imaginative scribe using a stencil. Historians still debate whether any supernatural guardians ever patrolled these paths, or if stories grew to embellish dry travel logs. You follow the arrow's direction, stepping lightly over cracked pottery fragments and broken tent pegs. Soon, you arrive at a series of small reliefs etched into a smooth sandstone surface. Outlines of date palms, dotted lines indicating dunes, and tiny vignettes of tents. It looks like a minimalist board game carved by bored caravan guards. A mainstream consensus dates these relief maps to the 10th century, when Sufi mystics often traveled in small groups and recorded their journeys in cryptic symbols. You kneel to examine the carvings, noting that each palm icon is connected by a shallow channel, almost like a drawn furrow for water. Fringe scholars speculate that these channels once held colored sand, red ochre or crushed lapis, to highlight routes. During certain seasons, whether traders actually refilled these channels each spring, or if this was simply a seasonal art project, historians still argue whether colored route mapping ever caught on or remained an experimental novelty. Leaning closer, you notice a tiny notch beneath one palm icon, a hole just wide enough to hold a slender reed. Fringe lore suggests that inserting a reed could produce a whistling note when wind passed through, serving as a sonic map. A coded tune to confirm you'd reached the correct oasis. Historians still debate whether this whistling map idea was ever implemented or if it's a fanciful tale told around campfires. You pause for a moment, testing the notch with a stick, but all you get is a hollow echo, as if the desert itself is shrugging. You stand and bask in the morning light, running your hands along the etched lines. It strikes you that these maps weren't just guides. They were stories carved into stone, visual diaries of hardship and hope. You crack a joke. If only today's GPS apps came with a built-in scorpion alert. 3 laughs so far, and the desert remains eerily calm. In the distance, you spot the ruins of a small outpost, crumbled walls half swallowed by sand drifts. According to mainstream excavations, this was a caravanserai, a roadside inn where traders and travelers could rest, water camels, and swap tales. You wander toward it, each step revealing more relics. Broken bowls, a rusted iron hinge, and faded wall paintings depicting camel trains against crimson skies. Historians still argue whether caravanserai were state-sponsored or private enterprises, but either way, they're your best bet for shade and storytelling. Inside the ramshackle courtyard, you discover another carved map, this one on a fallen column. The lines here are bolder, showing not only routes but distances marked in kos, ancient miles. You trace a route from this oasis to a distant city called Merv, imagining weary traders measuring each segment by the sun's position. Fringe cartographers suggest some kos measurements varied by region, turning a mile into a cosmic game of telephone. Historians still argue whether standardized distance units existed, or if each kingdom used its own ruler length. You snap a quick selfie against the crumbling backdrop. Well, not really, because selfies would have required a reflective shield and a lot of patience. Instead, you close your eyes and project yourself into an ancient traveler's sandals, feet blistered, water skin half empty, but heart buoyed by the promise of civilization ahead. Rising, you pocket a small flake of sandstone as a souvenir, feeling its weight like a fragment of time. You stand at the caravanserai's threshold, watching as a stray goat wanders through the archway, its bleat echoing through the empty chambers. You grin and offer your third joke. Even the local wildlife knows this was once a fancy hotel. As you turn back toward the shifting sands, the etched route shimmers in your mind, guiding you forward. These secret maps, carved and coded, connected distant worlds one notch and line at a time. And as you continue your journey, you carry their silent wisdom in each step, following paths traced by hands long turned to dust. You push onward past the abandoned caravanserai and spot a small encampment nestled in the lee of a rocky outcrop, its walls hidden by tattered banners and curling smoke. Two figures stand at its edge, a robed hermit stirring a cauldron of murky liquid, and a wiry magician juggling copper rings that catch the sunlight like miniature suns. Historians still argue whether itinerant ascetics or itinerant entertainers arrived first on Silk Road routes, but mainstream accounts confirm both shared the same dusty paths by the 9th century AD. As you approach, the hermit beckons with a gnarled finger, offering a gourd cup filled with a thick, amber potion. He claims it's a miracle elixir, brewed from desert herbs and camel milk, guaranteed to cure fatigue and ward off scorpion venom. Fringe practitioners insist the recipe includes crushed beetle shells for added potency, a detail you suspect belongs in a dream rather than a doctor's manual. Whether any traveler ever survived a sip without extra hiccups, historians still debate if these elixirs were therapeutic treatments or clever scams to lighten a pouch of coins. You lift the cup and sniff, an earthy, slightly sweet aroma tinged with something metallic. The hermit smiles knowingly and tells you that similar herbal remedies were recorded in 10th century Persian medical texts, blending Greek humoral theory with local folk wisdom. Historians still argue whether these texts influenced medieval European medicine or remained confined to Islamic world libraries, but you're more concerned about actually feeling invigorated rather than doctrinal debates. Setting the potion aside for a moment, you turn to the magician, whose hands move in a blur as he flips copper rings from one finger to the next. You catch a glint as one ring slips through his sleeve and reappears behind his ear. Classic sleight of hand that's survived countless centuries. Mainstream historians trace the art of sleight of hand back to Hellenistic Egypt, where street performers dazzled pharaonic audiences as early as the 2nd century BC. Fringe lore suggests some magicians enhanced their tricks with mild hemp smoke to blur spectators' vision, an assertion historians still debate based on fragmentary travelers' tales. The magician bows theatrically and offers to trade you a copper ring for a handful of salt from Section 2's caravans. You raise an eyebrow, recalling how salt once rivaled gold in value. "Deal," you quip, handing over a pinch of salt dust. He loops the ring over your finger with a flourish and winks, as though he's just shared a secret handshake. 3 jokes in, and you feel almost like a member of this roving duo. Behind the hermit's cauldron lies a low table strewn with oddities: dried lizard claws, tiny glass bottles of dyed sand, and a leather pouch claiming to hold true desert. Moonlight. You pick up the pouch and peer inside. A handful of glittering dust that flakes through your fingers. The hermit whispers that moonlight was once collected by leaving silver bowls under a full moon, then scraping away the dew at dawn. Whether anyone ever bothered to test its efficacy or simply marveled at the ritual, historians still argue whether moon dust held any real pharmacological value or was purely symbolic. Nearby, a small notebook bound in worn leather lies, open on a carved wooden box. Its pages contain scribbled diagrams of star charts and herbal compendia. You recognize drawings of foxglove and pennyroyal, plants known for both healing and hallucinogenic properties. Mainstream sources note that medieval herbalists recorded these species in treatises, warning of their narrow therapeutic windows. Fringe commentators suggest some hermits intentionally induced mild visions to entertain passing caravans, though historians still debate whether these vision quests were spiritual practices or roadside spectacles. A sudden gust shakes the banners overhead, sending sand swirling into the magician's ring pile. He catches one mid-air without missing a beat, prompting a round of impressed murmurs from nearby travelers. You joke that you'd applaud more loudly if your hands didn't look so dusty. 3 laughs, and you're still keeping pace with their impromptu show. The hermit leans close and demonstrates his remedy's application. He dribbles a single drop of the amber potion onto a scraped knee of a stray goat tethered nearby. The goat bleats, shakes its head, then stands unsteadily before bounding off as if nothing happened. Fringe sources claim some travelers trained goats to perform such rites as proof of medicine's power, a convenient testimonial that historians still dispute based on animal welfare accounts from the era. You step back, considering the scene: a magician twisting copper rings, a hermit curing goats, and a handful of onlookers half curious, half skeptical. It feels like a miniature traveling court, complete with showmanship and pseudo-science. You quip that this must be the desert's answer to Netflix variety specials. The magician gathers his rings and slips them into a faded satchel before producing a small lute. He plays a few notes, a soft, nostalgic melody that threads through the desert air like a gentle breeze. You recognize the tune from Section 7's flute motifs, now rendered on a stringed instrument. Historians still argue whether regional lullabies migrated between instruments or emerged independently in different caravan camps. The hermit nods in approval and adds a final flourish to his cauldron, stirring the potion until it glows faintly in the morning light. He gestures for you to taste again, this time offering a single drop on your tongue. You oblige, bracing yourself. The flavor is unexpectedly smooth, honeyed and herbal, with a fleeting warmth that spreads through your chest. You smile and joke that it's better than most energy drinks, albeit with a questionable aftertaste. Impressed, you ask if the pair ever collaborated to entertain and heal at desert festivals. The magician grins and tells you that in some fringe accounts, roadshow duos like theirs toured Oasis markets yearly, offering miracle cures and marvels as seasonal highlights. Historians still debate whether these circuits were formal organizations or informal gatherings of wandering entertainers. Before departing, the hermit hands you a small vial of clear liquid. Distilled desert dew, he says, best applied as a face mist to ward off windburn. You tuck it into your satchel alongside the copper ring and pearls, amused by your ever-growing collection. You bow to them both, and the magician tips an imaginary hat, while the hermit strokes his beard in silent blessing. Walking away, you glance back at the encampment, seeing it shrink into the sunlit haze. The memory of juggling rings, cured goats, and secret potions lingers like a dream. You pat your satchel, feeling the odd assortment of trinkets shift lightly, proof that in this desert world, magic and medicine often walked hand in hand, blurring lines between belief and reality. You stride across a swath of open sand toward a cluster of weathered stones that jut from the dunes like the ribs of some ancient leviathan. As you draw nearer, your gaze lands on a dramatic mural painted in faded pigments across a flat stone face, a colossal whale, its tail arcing above rolling dunes, spouting mist as if it reaches from an invisible sea. You squint against the sun, recalling that historians still argue whether this mirage whale was the product of hallucinations caused by heat or an allegorical warning from early desert poets. The mural's details emerge in the morning light. The whale's eye, carved deep and shaded in ochre, seems to follow your every step, while its mouth is agape in eternal song. Mainstream archaeologists date the artwork to around the 8th century AD, crediting nomadic Sogdian tribes with crossing tales from coastal merchants who spoke of the vast Indian Ocean. Fringe scholars contend that desert winds shaped sandstorms into whale-like silhouettes, sparking legends so vivid they etched themselves into stone. Whether the mural commemorates an actual sea beast sighting or serves as poetic metaphor, historians still debate its true inspiration. You trace your fingertip along a curving line, an elegant flourish representing the whale's dorsal ridge. The rock feels warm beneath your touch, sun-smoothed by centuries of wind and abrasion. According to local lore, whenever a tribe migrated past this spot, the mural's gaze would guide them toward hidden water sources. Mainstream field reports note that nearby underground springs gurgle year-round, fueling oasis groves just beyond sight. Historians still argue whether the mural was a spiritual beacon or a practical map drawn by resourceful desert folk. A sudden gust kicks up desert dust, party, cleaning the air like powdered sun. You cough and shield your eyes, imagining what it would feel like to stand on a whale's back beneath crashing waves. An inconceivable fantasy in a land where sand replaces sea. Fringe accounts claim that certain caravans carried whale stones as talismans, believing the creature's spirit would protect them from sandstorms. Historians still debate whether any of these talismans have been discovered in tombs or if they remain the stuff of bedtime stories. You step back and admire a second, smaller engraving at the mural's base. A crescent moon dangling from the whale's fin. A poetic touch, you muse, as if the beast itself cradles night's first light. Mainstream art historians note that lunar motifs were common in Silk Road iconography, symbolizing cycles of travel and rest. Fringe theorists propose the moon whale pairing references a lost lunar calendar, one that tracked sandstorm seasons, rather than solar years. Historians still argue whether such calendars existed or lingered only in the realm of dreamers. Circling the mural, you discover faint footprints leading behind the stone. They wind through a narrow cleft in the rocks, worn smooth by passing feet. You follow them, curiosity trumping caution, and emerge into a hidden alcove where a natural cistern collects rainwater. The air is cool and fragrant with moss. A secret oasis tucked beneath the whale's silent watch. You cup the water in your palm, letting its chill seep through your skin. 3 jokes in, and your inner city slicker still marvels at desert plumbing's ingenuity. A carved inscription on the alcove's wall reads, "Only those who believe may sip the whale's well." You chuckle, wondering if belief alone purifies the water, or if common sense, cartography, and a good map would suffice. Historians still argue whether such inscriptions served as genuine rites or simply whimsical invitations for weary travelers to pause and hydrate. You kneel at the cistern's edge and peer into the murky depths, spotting a scattering of colored stones, turquoise, agate, and carnelian. Jewelry shards, perhaps offerings left by grateful wanderers. Mainstream reports confirm that many travelers tossed gems into wells as tokens of thanks or prayers for safe passage. Fringe mythologists claim that the whale spirit absorbed these offerings, granting safe journeys through metaphorical storms. Historians still debate whether these rituals were widespread across Silk Road oases or localized superstitions. Drawing back, you lie flat against the cool stone floor, letting the mural's presence envelop you. The whale's painted curves arch overhead, and the distant sound of wind through the cleft resembles a mournful song. A poetic lullaby, you think, sung by the desert itself. Fringe travelers suggest that those who rested here at dusk reported vivid dreams of ocean voyages. Historians still argue whether these accounts reflect genuine dream patterns or simply the power of suggestion under starlit skies. You close your eyes and imagine you're adrift on an endless sea, waves lapping at your ankles instead of sand, the whale's massive silhouette gliding beneath your small boat. A stray thought brings a joke to your lips. You'll need a boat license for this kind of mirage. 3 laughs achieved, and you're halfway to drifting off. Opening your eyes, you rise and toss a smooth turquoise into the water as a thank you offering. It creates ripples that shimmer in the dim light, like liquid pearls dancing across a moonlit sea. You gather your satchel, now heavier with gems and memories, and slip back through the cleft into the bright desert. Before you vanish from view, you glance back at the mural one more time. The whale's eye seems to wink, as if acknowledging your departure. And as you retrace your path to the main market, you carry with you the enigmatic spirit of the mirage whale, an enduring symbol that even in the driest places, imagination can conjure the wildest ocean dreams. You crest a low dune and pause, surveying the abandoned bazaar now sprawled before you like a half-forgotten dream. Tattered goat hair tents sag in the heat, once bustling stalls stand empty, and the scent of citrus and spices has faded to parched earth. Historians still argue whether the market's decline began in the 13th century due to shifting caravan routes, or only after a series of devastating sandstorms in the 16th century. But the silence speaks louder than any theory. Mainstream chronicles note that as sea trade flourished between India and the Arabian Peninsula, overland caravans dwindled, redirecting goods onto ships and bypassing desert way stations altogether. You imagine richly laden dhows slipping through monsoon winds, carrying saffron, pearls, and silk in hulls where no scorpion could sting your sandals. Yet this oasis, once a crossroads of cultures, fell victim to progress, a casualty of cheaper, faster sea routes. Stepping carefully over cracked pottery and broken reed baskets, you recall bottlenecks detailed in Section 6, where merchants once haggled over salt and silk. Now, those artful negotiations echo only in memory. A lone wooden sign, one of the market codes from Section 9, hangs askew, its edges frayed by sun and sand. "No insulting another trader's mother," it still reads, as though the rules show who's the silence. You chuckle at the thought of a ghostly camel officer patrolling these empty aisles. Here and there, a few stubborn relics remain. A cluster of crushed spice jars, still sticky with saffron and pepper residue. A water-stained ledger from Section 2's caravan crossing, and a handful of colorful fragments from the lost tents described in Section 4. Each fragment tugs at your memory, like a melody from the flute of Section 7 carried now only by the whispering wind. You kneel beside a collapsed stall once run by the hermit healer of Section 11, spotting a chipped gourd cup half buried in sand. You lift it gently, still tasting a trace of that amber elixir you sipped. Fringe tales claim he left in haste after a camel-snatching raid, leaving behind his cures and a note scrawled in beetle ink. Trust moonlight to guide you home. Historians still debate whether such raids were common bandit attacks or politically sanctioned strikes by rival oasis lords. But the hermit's departure felt like the last flicker of life here. Rising, you wander toward the old well from Section 5. Its stone rim cracked and dry. Once a lifeline, it now stands as a silent monument. You drop a pebble into its depth. There's no echo, no welcome drip. You recall the kanat channels that once fed date palms beyond, now collapsed under centuries of neglect. Mainstream sources confirm that many desert wells fell into disuse when trade patterns shifted, causing local populations to migrate toward coastal cities. Whether this oasis emptied in a single exodus or via gradual trickle, historians still argue over the timeline. You pause beside the mangled remains of a spice cart, its wheels sun-bleached and splintered. A faint smear of crimson, perhaps remnants of saffron, marks the wood. You press your fingers against the stain, imagining the vibrant aroma that once drew travelers. Then you remember the pepper bursts from Section 3 and smile at how even the fiercest spice couldn't stave off desert time. Your gaze drifts to a half-buried milestone carved with map glyphs from Section 10. The arrow pointing west now leads to open desert, The caravanserai beyond has long since crumbled. You brush away sand, revealing a second glyph, a stylized mosque dome that hints at a final attempt to revive the market as a religious stopping point. Fringe lore suggests a pious ruler tried hosting annual pilgrimages here, but the harsh environment proved too much, and devotees preferred safer routes. Historians still debate whether those pilgrimages ever took place, or if they were just hopeful. Prophecies carved in stone. A dull breeze stirs the faded banners you met near Section 11's encampment, snapping them once before they fall silent again. You follow the breeze to a cluster of flattened tents, where children from Section 9 once reenacted sneeze duels. Now, nothing moves but drifting sand. You jokingly whisper, "Looks like allergies cleared out the competition," earning a soft chuckle from your own lips in the empty market. At the market's far edge, you discover an overturned reed basket filled with smooth pebbles, tokens from travelers offering thanks at the whale mural in Section 12. Many are scratched with tiny symbols, each one a prayer or pledge. You pick one up, a small shard of carnelian etched with a crescent moon. You remember the mural's silent winks and pocket the pebble, thinking it more precious than any dirham. Stepping back to the center of the deserted square, you close your eyes and let the oasis's past swirl around you. Footsteps on sand, laughter mingling with flute melodies, barter calls rising like incense smoke. You breathe in the dusty air and exhale a sigh, part nostalgia, part relief that you witnessed its last sigh of life. As you turn to leave, the sun begins its descent, casting lengthening shadows across the market stones. You glance once more at the silent stalls and cracked signs, acknowledging that some stories end not with a bang, but a whisper. And as you press onward into the dunes beyond, you carry with you the echoes of a bazaar that once thrived at dawn, now forever lost to time's gentle tide. You press onward, guided by the fading light toward a low rise strewn with fragments of painted pottery, and the crumbled remains of what appears to be another ancient well. Historians still argue whether this site was part of the original Oasis settlement, or a later extension built in the 11th century under Ghaznavid patronage, but mainstream excavations confirm shards here match the distinctive cobalt blue glazes used in Central Asian ceramics. Bending down, you sift through the sand and uncover a curved piece of terracotta adorned with intricate vine motifs. The glaze's luster is dulled by millennia of sun and dust, yet you can still trace the artisan's careful strokes. Fringe archaeologists claim some of these vessels were fired using camel dung as kiln fuel, imparting a smoky patina prized by collectors, though historians still debate whether this practice yielded consistent results or simply introduced unpredictable flaws. Nearby you find the remains of a stone-lined shaft. Another well, though now collapsed. Lumps of masonry lie in a rough circle, and loose stones have tumbled inward, filling the cavity. Mainstream scholars note that such wells often featured double-thick walls to prevent collapse and maintain water purity, an innovation attributed to early Islamic engineers. Historians still argue whether these engineers borrowed designs from Roman aqueduct builders or developed the method independently. You uncover a lump of mortar flecked with crushed shell fragments, evidence of local craftspeople mixing binders with organic additives to reinforce structural integrity. You pocket the sample for later inspection, thinking it might tell a story as rich as any silk thread. 3 jokes in, and you're still marveling at construction hacks older than your favorite DIY blog. Dragging your fingers along the well's rim, you notice faint tool marks, chisel grooves that hint at manual labor under harsh conditions. Fringe sources suggest some laborers chiseled at night, guided only by lantern light, and the same lullaby flute motif you've heard echoing through sections 1, 3, and 7. Historians still debate whether night work sped construction, or simply kept workers awake at odd hours. Turning your attention back to the pottery field, you spot a large shard, painted with a stylized bird. its wings outstretched as if mid-flight. Mainstream evidence indicates this motif was common on storage jars, used for grain, symbolizing protection against pests and spoilage. You hold the shard up to the sun, its edges casting dancing shadows that recall the market's sun-dappled tents from Section 4. You crouch and gently tap a nearby fragment with a small stone, listening for the distinct ring that betrays remaining glaze. It emits a dull chime, more hollow than melodic, but enough to confirm the shard's ceramic origin. You joke that it sounds like a tiny desert bell, one that never got its moment in Section 6's Bell Symphony. Surveying the scene, you notice linear depressions in the sand, traces of collapsed walls that once supported a series of connected stalls. You follow the line, brushing away sediment to reveal a row of low stone pillars, each topped with a flat slab. Mainstream reports suggest these foundations supported wooden beams for awnings, creating shaded corridors for merchants' goods. Historians still argue whether these corridors were roofed with palm fronds or imported wooden planks. Located at one corner of this architectural grid, you find a partially intact ceramic basin carved with interlocking geometric patterns, an unmistakable sign of Seljuk influence. The basin's interior is stained with residues of water and dates, hinting it once held offerings or communal drinking. Water. Fringe legends propose these basins served as fortune-telling tools, where travelers would peer into the water's surface to glimpse their fate. Historians still debate whether such divinatory practices were fringe superstitions or mainstream communal rituals. You wet a corner of the basin with a drop of your distilled dew from Section 11's Hermit, watching as the patterns momentarily darken and then return to dusty tan. It feels like activating a hidden message, a callback that thrills you more than any modern puzzle hunt. 3 jokes in, you gauge the basin's contours and muse that it's the world's oldest mood ring. Beyond the basin, the earth slopes gently down to reveal a buried fragment of a clay lamp similar to the one from Section 7. Its nozzle is broken, but wick deposits still cling to its lip. Mainstream historians record that oil lamps were ubiquitous across Silk Road settlements, with standard shapes evolving little over centuries. Fringe commentators claim certain lamp designs mimicked local constellations, so that when lit, the flames shadow cast star patterns onto tent walls. Historians still argue whether such celestial lamps actually existed or remain wishful speculation. As you continue, you discover a scatter of turquoise bead fragments, once part of necklaces traded from distant mines. Their faded hues remind you of the whale mural's fallen offerings in Section 12, tying this archaeological site back to myth and material culture. You collect a handful, noting each piece's chipped edges, thinking fondly of the scenes that brought these beads here. Laughter, barter, and the distant song of a reed pipe. A gust of wind sweeps across the site, stirring the loose pottery and sending dust motes aloft. You blink and inhale, tasting a hint of crushed glaze on the air. You recall the citrus scents from Section 1, now faded but never forgotten. The wind's breath feels like history itself exhaling, reminding you that these shards, stones, and relics are the silent storytellers of human endeavor. Standing, you survey the field one last time. Fractured ceramics glint under the sun, wells whisper of hidden waters, and foundations hint at bustling corridors now reclaimed by dunes. Each fragment you uncovered is a verse in the Oasis market's long poem, carved in clay, stone, and memory. With your satchel fuller and your mind richer, you step away from the archaeological field, leaving the fragments to their slow drift into oblivion. Yet you carry them in your heart, knowing that every shard is a testament to human resilience, creativity, and the timeless urge to build, barter, and dream amidst the sands. You emerge from the archaeological field and crest a small dune just as dawn's first pale light brushes the horizon. Below, the expanse of dunes stretches endless, their ridges glowing like molten gold. You pause, letting the cool pre-dawn air fill your lungs, and realize the same sun that once illuminated tents of goat hair and spice carts now transforms these sands into a silent cathedral. Historians still argue whether the Silk Road's memory survives in oral traditions of local desert tribes or only in dusty manuscripts locked away in distant libraries. But here, under this gentle sky, the past feels vividly alive. Below you, the valley where the Oasis market once bustled lies empty. Only the faintest outlines of collapsed stalls and scattered relics betray its presence. Yet as sunlight crests higher, each dune glimmers with echoes. The citrus scent lingering in morning breezes, the distant hum of a flute, even the laughter of merchants haggling over salt and silk. Mainstream observers note that desert topographies can preserve microclimates that carry subtle scents and sounds long after human activity fades, a phenomenon known as olfactory memory. You inhale deeply and swear you detect a faint hint of saffron riding the wind. You step gingerly down the dune, footprints imprinting fresh lines alongside ancient tracks. In earlier sections, you traced caravan salt piles and portended potion cauldrons. Now you traverse a landscape that binds all those moments together. At one spot, a gentle curve in the sand resembles the arch of a tent frame you glimpsed in Section 4. Further on, a low hollow mirrors the well's rim from Section 5, now silted but still marking water's memory beneath. Fringe travelers whisper that the dunes themselves remember human footsteps, shifting to imprint echoes of past travelers, a claim historians still debate based on satellite imagery and local lore. As you walk, sunlight warms your shoulders and turns the sand into a blanket of glowing embers. You recall the spice vendor's bright jars, Section 3, and the map glyphs carved in stone, Section 10, now scattered like breadcrumbs along your path. Each memory tethers you to these dunes, binding disparate moments into a single tapestry. You joke that if you tumble down the next ridge, you'll land in the spice cart or land by the hermit's cauldron. 3 jokes in before breakfast, and the desert remains unamused. Reaching a broad crest, you look north toward a distant cluster of palms, an echo of the ancient oasis. Though the market has vanished, the palms still stand guard, their fronds whispering secrets of water channels and past pilgrims' prayers. Mainstream ecologists observe that desert flora often outlasts human settlements, their roots tapping aquifers long after wells collapse. These palms, like silent sentinels, recall every traveler who paused beneath their shade. You settle on a wind-sculpted rock and watch the dunes ripple with warmth. In the distance, the Mirage Whale mural, Section 12, would rise from behind a dune if only your eyes were sharper. But instead you see only an unbroken sea of sand. Yet in your mind's eye, you replay the whale's arching tail, its carved, eye-winking as you offered your turquoise prayer. The desert invites you to overlay its present emptiness with imagined histories, a living canvas for stories. Your gaze shifts to a lone reed still standing on a remote dune, a remnant of a map, notch from Section 10. It sways in the breeze, a subtle beacon reminding you that guidance persists even when maps fade. Fringe cartographers suggest such reeds once marked secret spring channels. Historians still debate whether their placement was deliberate or accidental. You smile, imagining a caravan guide squinting at a lone reed and exclaiming, "This way, to salvation." Above you, the sky turns rose and gold, echoing the citrus groves of Section 1, now a memory carried in every sunrise here. You rise and brush sand from your robes, feeling the warmth seep into your bones. It's a gentle reminder that the desert's transformation at dawn mirrors the market's cycles of opening and closing. Commerce and quiet, noise and solitude, laughter and stillness. As you take your final steps toward the palms, you sense the continuity between past and present, a market lost to time but immortalized in dunes that glow each morning as if refusing oblivion. And as you descend toward the lone palms, you carry with you the market's youthful energy and the desert's enduring hush, knowing that every dawn here is a new chapter in a story that began centuries ago. Word count, 1019, 300 word, wind down. Your eyelids grow heavy as you nestle against the gentle curve of a palm root, the sun's warmth spreading across your forehead. Let your breathing slow, in and out, each inhale drawing in soft golden light, each exhale releasing the days. Wade into the shifting sand. Feel the dunes' ancient rhythms pulsing beneath you, a steady heartbeat of wind and grain guiding you toward calm. Remember the market's laughter fading into muted echoes, the spice vendor's chuckle, the camel's gentle grunt, the hermit's whispered blessing, and the merchant's flute drifting like a lullaby. Those voices now soften into the desert's own melody, a whisper of silk threads brushing tent walls, the distant drip of hidden wells, and the subtle sigh of heat rising from sun-baked stones. Here, in this quiet liminal space, time folds gently. The salt-laden caravans, the pearls plucked from ocean depths, the secret maps carved in stone, and the mirage whale all rest together beneath the same amber sky. Let their stories mingle and dissolve, blending into one tranquil panorama where past and present breathe as one. As the light dims slightly in your mind's eye, release every tightness in your shoulders, letting warmth cascade down your arms. Imagine that each grain of sand cradles you, soft and supportive, guiding you toward restful slumber. Your last conscious thought is a sigh of gratitude for the market's memory, the desert's embrace, and the gentle promise of renewal that each dawn brings. Now drift away on the dune's soft sigh, carried by a breath of citrus breeze and ambient flute, into a night of peaceful dreams.